In the last lecture, we took our narrative of the French Revolution to the fall of Robespierre and the end of the Jacobin Republic, or in other words, the end of the Reign of Terror. Today, we take a little break from the chronological narrative and look at two related but important issues of the role of women during the revolution and the cultural aspect of the revolution. Women played a significant role in the French Revolution. One of the abiding pictures that we have is from Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities, the picture of Madame Defarge knitting by the side of the bulletin. In contemporary engravings and paintings, we have picture of women in the barricades, in the long braid queues, and generally mixed with the revolutionary crowd during almost each of the revolutionary insurrections that we have. Another very clear imprint is that of women leading a long procession to bring back the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy from Versailles to Paris, that really at a level crystallized the revolution. Yet there is a curious silence in the revolutionary discourse about women. The Declaration of the Rights of Man virtually declared the rights of man only, excluding as it did women. Women's rights, political rights particularly, did not figure. They did not have any right to vote under any of the constitutions which the revolution had drafted during this period. Some historians have detected even an element of misogyny in the revolutionary leadership. It is indeed curious that Pierre Gaspard Chaumette, who had supported the abolition of slavery, did not support the right of women. He subscribed to the dominant idea of the time that women's position is in the household. Again, it is strange that he could find the link between the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the question of the freedom of the slaves, but did not find any connection between the Declaration and the rights of women. Yet there were men who did support this, who did support the women's rights, the question of women's rights. Among them was Condorcet. In 1790, Condorcet published an article in a newspaper on the question of women's rights. And he said that either everyone has right or no one has right, that women have as much right to have political rights and other kind of rights as men. But Condorcet's voice, it would seem, was a rarity in France during the Revolution. There are women leaders. They created their own societies. They joined some of the mixed clubs and tried to create a new discourse about the rights of women. Among them, we might mention the Dutch lady, Etta Palm Dailders. She had joined one of the clubs, and she gave an address, I'm quoting, when she joined the Confederation of the Friends of Truth on 30th December 1790, "Gentlemen, you have admitted my sex to this patriotic club. This is a first step towards justice. Yet everywhere the laws favor men at the expense of women," unquote. She was a part of a larger group known as Cercle Social, Social Circle, which, among other things, talked of the women's rights. This club, where she gave her address, Confederation of the Friends of Truth, had been one of those mixed clubs, political clubs that came up during the revolution. Here the women came, the women were trying to not clearly demand political rights, but they were raising a few issues, for example, about marriage, about inheritance. She was not alone in this. There were other important leaders as well. We must mention a brilliant spokesperson for women's rights, Marie Gouge. She is better known by her pseudonym of Olympe de Gouges. The daughter of a butcher from southern part of France and self-educated, Olympe de Gouges was a champion of women's rights and indeed demanded gender equality. In September 1791, she published a Declaration of the Rights of Woman on the model of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. Again, I'm quoting from what she said. There were several articles. The Article 1, for example, said, women are born equal and remain equal in rights with men. This was a clear assertion of her right. Article 6, for example, said, I'm quoting, the law should be the expression of the general will. All citizenesses and citizens should take part in its formation. All citizenesses and citizens being equal in its eyes should be equally admissible to all public dignities, offices and employments, unquote. She also said that the mothers, sisters, daughters, all females want to be constituted into a new assembly, a new, almost a constituent or a national assembly. And finally, in the postscript, she gave the clarion, quote, women, wake up, the tocsin of reason sounds throughout the universe. Recognize your rights. Here was a clear assertion that women must share all rights with men. Yet, this kind of clear assertion forced her to pay dearly. Olympe de Gouges was condemned by none other than Chaumette as a shameless and unnatural woman. He again asserted that women's role is in the home, and it is dangerous, it is indeed shameless and unnatural, as he said, to be in the political arena. Olympe de Gouges had to pay with her life for her fearless assertion of the women's rights. All the assemblies refused to listen to the demand for granting women's rights. It's not that the women were demanding political rights right away, but the women, as I said earlier, played very useful roles. They, for example, during the war and the counter-revolution, they had supported the revolution. They contributed to the war effort by organizing workshops, by weaving blankets, by producing bandages. They knitted socks for the soldiers because the soldiers were ill-equipped. Apart from Olympe de Gouges or Etta Palm Delders, there were other important women like Pauline Léon and Claire Lacombe. They also created a new club known as the Society of Revolutionary Republican Women. This was established in May 1793. See, at a time when the revolution was being radicalized through popular pressure, women also tried to come to the fore to assert their rights. But even during the Jacobin period, there was a neglect of the gender issues, of women's issues. Men like Chaumette, we had seen earlier, dismissed any notion or any idea of granting rights to women. The newspapers also stuck to the old cliches of women's position being in the household. For example, Proudhon in an editorial asserted again this. He said they ought to raise the family, instill private virtue and stay out of public affairs. Yet there were some who were in favor of granting them rights, like La Juinet or Pierre Guiomard. Guiomard in particularly said that man in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen is a generic term. It includes women. Man means granting of right to everyone. Claire Lacombe and Pauline Léon were two other very important leaders, as I said. There were also about 60 such societies or clubs that women had set up for themselves. These were spread all over France, but they were concentrated, as it would be only be natural, in Paris. There was also a club called the Amazon Club. Here we have women who did not want rights, but who wanted to fight as soldiers. They wanted uniforms. There were, however, a whole lot of misgivings about women demanding these rights. A group of women indeed came to the convention and complained that some revolutionary and militant women were forcing them to wear the cap of liberty, the red cap of liberty. Several members in the assembly took exception to this, and very soon the convention decreed that there should be liberty of dress. No one should be obliged or forced to do something. Then again there was a demand, and this was led by Amar, Jean-Baptiste Amar, in October 1793, that all the political clubs and societies must be closed down. And this is precisely what happened. At the end of October, the convention simply decreed that all women's clubs and societies remain closed. Now, this then is in brief the position of women during the revolution. They demanded rights but did not quite get them. It would, however, be wrong to believe that women did not have any role. I have told up icons, but you have the abiding icon of liberty, for example. When reason was being worshipped, the goddess of reason was conceived of as a woman. Delacroix has immortalized in his painting Liberty Leading the People, and liberty here is a woman iconized as liberty. So there was a curious dichotomy that is difficult to explain. Women did, however, play a significant role during the revolution. They clamored for their rights, at least some women did. They set up their own societies, their own clubs. They joined the mixed-sex clubs. They were on the streets. They joined the revolutionary crowd, and in this way were able to create a discourse of their own. Their rights were not won during that decade, but they were won much later. And it would not be far-fetched to say that many of the basic questions relating to women's rights movements later could be traced back to this decade of the French Revolution. We now shift to culture. Recent historiography has somewhat moved away from the mainstream narratives of political, economic, and social history to look at the cultural domain as well. The historians have used such other disciplines as sociology, linguistics, anthropology, etc., to try and delineate the broader framework within which to locate the cultural shift that one finds during the revolution. Emmett Kennedy, in fact, calls the French Revolution a profound cultural experience. Culture no longer meant simply cataloging the paintings or sculptures which were made during the revolution. It denoted, it had a wider connotation now. The names of places, for example, were changed very quickly. For example, Rue de Vierge became Rue Voltaire. Ile de Saint-Louis became Ile de la Fraternité. Now, all these indicated a new ethos, a new culture that was being created in the process of the revolution being made. Revisionist historians had drawn our attention to a very significant thing, the birth of a new political culture during the revolution. Lynn Hunt, for example, says that the political class that led the revolution was bourgeois, but the broader cultural framework of the bourgeoisie or the bourgeois as a class must be understood in the cultural formation and through the language and imageries. As Gwyn Lewis, a recent historian, has said, that the aim of the revolution was to create l'homme nouveau, a new man. Now, we would have to very briefly look at the dimensions of the new culture during the revolutionary period. Let us begin with religion. Now, the religious sensibility had been undergoing a process of change in course of the 18th century. The context of enlightenment was indeed very significant. It has been shown that belief was probably on the decline even before the revolution had started. But first, the official approach to religion. The first attack that the revolution made was the civil constitution of the clergy. There is one historian who would call the oath that the clergy were required to take now to be a seminal event even within the revolutionary decade. There was a wide regional variety in the taking of the oath. We had seen that the revolution, this civil constitution of the clergy virtually split the religious life of France down the middle. There were many who did not take the oath and many who did. There was Hébert, Jacques Hébert and his dechristianization movement. We had seen earlier in the context of the Reign of Terror that this was a very radical movement which through the Paris Commune, for example, in Paris, tried to stop all religious ceremonies even within the church. They had stopped it outside the church, they confined it to the church, and then there was a move to even close down the churches. We had seen the very interesting incident of churches, one church being allowed only one bell, and the rest of the bells were brought down, melted, and converted into cannons, which were needed for the war. So this was a very serious and profound secularization of religious practice and belief at a level. The dechristianization movement went beyond. There was worship of reason, and indeed Notre Dame was converted into the temple of prison. There was a Chenier who composed the song, and he was a poet. Along with composer Gossec, he composed the hymn to liberty. The hymn to liberty was, in a way, the new anthem. A whole new attitude was now to be disseminated amongst the people. The movement was short-lived, but it had cultural significance. Then we have Robespierre and his supreme being. Robespierre was against dechristianization. I'm quoting from Robespierre. He explained what the supreme being was about. Quote, "The real priest of the supreme being is nature. His festivals, the joy of a great people, in order to draw close to the sweet bonds of universal brotherhood." Unquote. As Gwyn Lewis puts it, one could almost hear Rousseau breathe amen by the side of Robespierre. So secularization of ethics, secularization of festivals, Festival of Reason, Festival of Liberty. There were numerous such festivals, and this had been a part of the cultural shift that one does detect in the revolutionary decade. Mona Ozouf has said all the revolutionaries invested the educational issue with enormous symbolic significance. Condorcet was the first to propose educational reform, but his was too idealistic. Lepelletier also suggested what would appear to many to be impractical, but what was being suggested was the close surveillance of the state. The state control would substitute church control. So education was also to be secularized at a level. The content of education would be modern. There would be mathematics, science, languages, civic and republican virtues. These are the contents of the new curricula which were being suggested. New kind of schools were also sought to be set up. There would be new secondary schools. These were known as, there were some like Grandes Écoles, like the École Polytechnique, which continues to be one of the most elite institutions in France. There would be École Centrale. École Centrale would be for secondary education. But these were the precursors of what Napoleon introduced later, the lycée. The lycée system remains a part of France's education system even today. Then the system, however, that was being suggested was two-tier. There would be one for the elite and one for the masses. A third area where one can detect certain cultural shift is in print culture. We had seen that even before the revolution, there was an explosion of printing material. It continued during the revolutionary period. We have had occasion earlier to refer to the number of pamphlets which were being printed and published around that time the revolution did break out. It continued through the revolutionary decade, at least up to a time. It's very significant that this period, in a way, signified the emergence of the author as an individual. The author was simply not a producer of a book, but a man who was endowed with right. And I suggest in this one does see the link of a market in book and the bourgeois ethos taking over. A law in 1793 gave the author the virtual ownership of his book. He would enjoy the fruits so long as he was alive, and his successors would enjoy the fruits for 10 years. Napoleon later doubled this to 20 years. But at the same time, as these numerous journals were coming out, we know Marat's L'Ami du Peuple, Hébert's Le Père Duchesne, or Le Vieux Cordelier by Desmoulins. There was Montmoreau of the Paris sections, who was the official printer and publisher of the Cordelier Club. Now, they were also to experience, a different kind of censorship. That ultimately, this plethora of publications obliged the government to draw a line, what was to be permitted and what must not be permitted. And we know Desmoulins, Hébert, Montmoreau all perished on the guillotine. Indeed, Napoleon even reintroduced censorship later. The Abbé Grégoire, who was certainly a Republican and had made on behalf of convention a survey of publications, suggested that grants or subsidies be given to publications with the right kind of cultural and political views. Finally, in architecture also there was a quest to find a new space. The new space must be in sync with the new cultural order. We have several. Boulez, for example, plans for creating a new space in Champs-Élysées. His plans of a grand Coliseum. François Velli's project for a new city center in Lille. Pierre Rousseau's design for redeveloping École des Beaux-Arts area. Now, all this indicated that there was a shift even in the way architecture or space was being planned in the cities at least. But there was a return to antiquity rather than innovative creativity. As again, one historian recently has said that there was a degree of quote-unquote modernism, but ultimately the Doric columns, the obelisk and the rotunda win hands down. This cultural shift from Rococo to the neoclassical was in intellectual harmony with the rational physical universe of the Enlightenment. And in painting, the final point to which we come, there was the colossal figure of Jacques-Louis David. David was an outstanding painter of the period, bringing new and revolutionary sensibility into his creation. Tennis Court Oath, the assassination of Marat, you can name hundreds by him. And he wanted to come out to emancipation from the stultifying experience of the Royal Academy. And he declared, "French nation, it is your glory that I wish to propagate." He contributed significantly to the cultural formation of the nation. He was also a pageant master of the Republic. And in this, we find that he had a very important role in playing, in organizing the revolutionary festivals, etc. I may end with a description of two Herculeses that we have. Hercules was being used twice in the Festival of Unity and Indivisibility of the Republic on 10th August 1793 and Supreme Being in 1794. As Linhart says, Hercules in the first one is a rugged and brutal figure. In the second is composed and classical in his demeanor. This indicated the political evolution of the revolution from the popular phase in 1793 to a more conventional etatist phase in the summer of 1794. The people, however, in the meantime had been controlled, as Linhart puts it.